Dear colleagues, friends, guests, it's my great pleasure today to welcome you to an event that I consider the highlight of the year on our campus. The Symposium on Ottoman Scientific Heritage, which was co-organized and co-hosted with Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation. It's also my privilege to welcome our distinguished guests, some sitting over there and some sitting here with me. My privilege to welcome our distinguished guests who are joining us from different corners of the United States and the world. I and/or my colleagues will offer more appropriate introductions for each speaker as we proceed. But we all know the person whose Lebenswerk has brought us all together today. We are not only fortunate, but also deeply honored that Professor Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu has graciously accepted my suggestion nearly 2 years ago in Istanbul at a wedding, graciously accepted my invitation to launch and celebrate what was then the approaching publication in English of his Ottoman Scientific Heritage with a symposium here at Harvard. One cannot say too much about Professor İhsanoğlu's distinguished career. Yes, in the plural, careers. Because he somehow managed in an ordinary mortal's life to have, next to his distinguished academic work and career, a likewise distinguished diplomatic career and work as a public figure in Turkey. More appropriate and more detailed introductions will follow. No less worthy of celebration, if you allow me a bit of pride with our own community and our own students, no less worthy of celebration from our point of view was the fact that the translation of this magnum opus was the product of the precious labor of our own Maryam Patton. I would like to leave the floor in a minute to Mr. Sheref Ahmed Zeki Yamani, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation, namely the foundation that published the volumes. I only have the first volume here. The volumes titled Ottoman Scientific Heritage that we are here to celebrate and to discuss. To the foundation too, we as readers, as scholars, offer our gratitude. More than as co-hosts. Yes. But before I leave the podium to Mr. Yamani, I would like to recognize the kind assistance of friends, Eda Özel, Mitch Bachi, I don't know if they're here, and express my deep gratitude to our staff colleagues at CMES, Lauren Montague, Eric Edstam, standing over there, and the indefatigable Liz Flanagan. Working with Maryam on all aspects of the organization was an added pleasure for me. Without further ado, I turn to Mr. Yamani for his welcoming address.
Thank you very much, Professor Kafedar, esteemed faculty, scholars, and honorable guests. I'm honored to be speaking to you all here in the Harvard University Faculty Club, in these rooms where the pursuit of knowledge has illuminated countless minds. We find ourselves gathered to celebrate a monumental work, the English version of the Ottoman Scientific Heritage, authored by His Excellency Professor Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu, published by the Al-Furqan Foundation with an excellent translation from Maryam Patton. Now let me start by saying that this book is a scholarly achievement and a bridge connecting generations of thinkers and seekers of knowledge. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, the Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation, founded 35 years ago by a Harvard alum, has been a steadfast protector of manuscripts around the world. And over the years, it has evolved into a comprehensive scholarly initiative with 3 dedicated centers that sheds light on the vast global contribution of the Islamic era scholarship from the 7th century onwards. And today, our commitment remains unwavering as we strive to unveil the Islamic written heritage, profound depth and diversity across all sciences, showcasing its rich narrative and intellectual breadth. And at the heart of our mission lies Professor İhsanoğlu's transformative work, a beacon that illuminates the scholarly landscape of the Ottoman period. This book, with all its volumes, challenges the conventional perception of a dormant era, revealing its profound scientific and intellectual achievements. Within the pages of the Ottoman Scientific Heritage, we find a meticulous examination of the time's scientific dynamism, presented clearly and supported by rigorous research. And this work documents both the historic and geographical expanse of the Ottoman scientific endeavor. It delves into its content, methodology, and subject matter, revealing the depth and diversity of the era's scientific thought. Today and tomorrow, in the symposium in partnership with Harvard's Center for Middle Eastern Studies, promises to be a vibrant exchange that will shed light on the significant scientific contribution of the Ottoman Empire, as detailed in Professor İhsanoğlu's book, Connecting Past Insights with Current Discussions. Now, allow me to say that only the man of the hour, Professor İhsanoğlu, or as we address him in the Yamani household as Uncle Ikmal, only he could have crafted such a masterpiece. He's renowned for his diplomatic fineness, scholarly pursuits, and leadership acumen. His worldly wisdom and dedication to cultural enrichment are as expansive as his charm and genuine warmth, making his writings not only informative, but also a delight to explore. He is very vital to many institutions and foundations all over the world, including the Al-Furqan Foundation, where he served on the board of directors, the advisory board, and the board of experts from day one, shaping the foundation into what it is today, which might also explain some of the white hair he does carry with him. His importance to us matches the strength of the bond between him and our late chairman, our founder, my father, Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani. And through his lifelong quest, through academic, diplomatic, and political spheres, Professor İhsanoğlu has gifted us with a work that transcends academic boundaries. This masterpiece captures the essence of our collective humanity and our enduring quest for meaning and understanding. It is no coincidence, of course, that this body of work, published by Al-Furqan, finds its way being celebrated amongst you here at Harvard. The connection between the university and Al-Furqan is not just institutional, but rather deeply personal. These buildings, or where we are today, bore witness to the academic journey of our founder in the 1950s, where his laying the groundwork for his profound understanding and global perspective. Harvard served as a crucible for his intellectual formation and a cherished platform for his insights as a lecturer in the 1980s and the 1990s. And I would say the university, the book, and the foundation are indeed a perfect alignment of time, knowledge, and dedication, underscoring our shared commitment to enriching our global discourse and fostering a deeper, more understanding world. In conclusion, I would like to thank Professor Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu for his lifelong monumental contribution to our shared global heritage. I would like to also thank Professor Jamal Kafedar for extending this invitation, setting the stage for such an intellectual exchange both today and tomorrow. I would like to also thank Maryam Patton for her skilled translation, making this treasure accessible to a broader audience across languages and cultures. And finally, I would like to also express my continued gratitude to the team at Al-Furqan, led by Sari Shahzavari, who could not be with us here today, for their commitment and unwavering dedication to preserving and promoting the Islamic written heritage. Today, more than ever, let our pursuit of knowledge inspire unity, inclusivity, and guide us towards a more peaceful, connected, and understanding world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yaman. That was fabulous. I will turn the floor over to Professor Hans-Georg Mayer for the keynote address, but only after introducing him to you. Professor Hans-Georg Mayer is Professor Emeritus of Near Eastern History, Culture, and Turkology, and was chairman of the Institute of the same name as at the Ludwig Maximilian Universität in Munich for many years before he retired in 2002. His work focuses on the comparative intellectual and scientific history and culture of the Ottoman Empire, and he is known for his studies on 17th century Ottoman political history, diplomacy, scholarly organization, social and economic situation of the ulema or scholars, and the relations between the scholars and the state. Professor Mayer received his doctorate in 1978 from the University of Munich with a dissertation on an intellectual biography of Uşşakizade, the author of Zeyli Şakayık, well known to the Ottomanists here, of course, as one of the most important sequels to one of the most important biographical dictionaries, collection of biographical dictionaries of scholars. In 1993, he was elected a full member of the Academia Europaea. His publications include, and I'll give you the English translations of most of the titles that are originally in German, Portraits of Ottoman Sultans Between East and West, most recent publication, that is in 2022. The Ottomans and Islam in Southeast Europe, 2014. Minorities in the Balkans, The Ottoman Heritage Revisited, 2007. Giovio Veronese and the Ottomans, toward a Sultan portrait of the Renaissance in Europe and the Turks in the Renaissance, 2000. With Raul Motica, former director of the Orient Institute in Istanbul that some of you will know, he published Turkish Economic and Social History, 1071 to 1920. The States of Southeastern Europe and the Ottomans, and Ottoman Studies on Economic and Social History in Memoriam Vano Boshkov, who was his professor. Professor Mayer is one of our long-term dear mentors and colleagues in the field, and Professor İhsanoğlu and Professor Mayer have had also a long-standing relationship and intellectual exchange and engagement of many decades, and we are very, very happy and honored to have Professor Mayer with us to celebrate the event. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a bit of problem with my voice. Please excuse it. Before beginning, I want, of course, to thank Professor Kafadar and the Furqan Foundation for inviting me to this important event, which I wouldn't have liked to miss. Now, for the life and the work of Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu, two decisions were fundamental. The decision of his father, Mehmet İhsan Efendi, to leave Turkey and to settle down in Egypt in 1924, and his own decision to return to Turkey in 1970. As Mehmet İhsan Efendi had married a Turkish girl there, his third son, Ekmeleddin, was born in Cairo as the son of Turkish parents 80 years ago. Although he grew up in one of the great historical centers of Arabic Islam. Within the walls of his home, he lived in a pious and educated Ottoman Turkish atmosphere. He began to read and study Ottoman Turkish literature from a young age with his father, who in addition hired language teachers to perfect his Turkish. At school and the outside world taught him Arabic, he became bilingual and developed a close interest in both the Turkish and the Arab language and literatures. Cultural and literary studies were to dominate his life. But his professional education and career first led him off into a different direction. He studied chemistry and received the degree of Bachelor of Science from Ain Shams University and Master of Science from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. However, for a man of his interests, to leave the field of cultural studies completely was unthinkable. While studying chemistry, he worked at the Darul Kutub, the Egyptian National Library, as a cataloger of manuscripts, printed books, and so on. This work influenced him greatly. He understood the importance of sources, and from that time onwards, books, manuscripts, calligraphy, and bibliography have been among his main fields of interest. In 1917, he left Cairo, the city of his childhood and youth, and went to Turkey, the land of his ancestors. It was a turning point, offering him new perspectives. He continued his studies in chemistry and received a PhD from Ankara University, and within his faculty he founded the Institute of Organic Chemistry, the first but not the only institution he founded during the years to come. Between 1975 and 7, he went to the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom as a research fellow and became fluent in English, mastering the third language essential for his further international career. After his return to Ankara, he continued his career as assistant professor for organic chemistry at the University of Ankara. The second turning point of his life and work occurred in 1980. He moved to Istanbul after having been appointed founding Director General of the Research Institute for Islamic History, Art and Culture, IRCIKA, established by the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Accepting this high position, he stepped, in addition to his scholarly activities, on an international stage and had to develop and show diplomatic and administrative skills, representing IRCIKA in international institutions and cultivating contacts with the members of the OIC and the international community of scholars. In more than 20 years, he shaped the excellent profile of that institution, then beautifully located in Abdülhamid's palace, the Yıldız Sarayı, above the Bosphorus. The program and the activities of the IRCIKA reflected many ideas and plans of its first Director General. A library was established, numerous projects were undertaken, researched and published, conferences were held, visitors received from all over the world, and last but not least, a regular Islamic calligraphy competition was organized. The main fields of Ekmeleddin-based personal research were the history of education and learning in Islam, the history of science, Turkish culture, Turkish-Arab relations, and the relations between the Muslim world and the West. His numerous books and articles were written in Turkish, English, and Arabic, some of them also translated into French, Japanese, Malay, Korean, Persian, Russian, and other languages. In these works, he shows himself to be a critical scholar who questions scholarly traditions, asks new questions, and dives deeply into the sources. The history of education, learning, and science, especially in the Ottoman Empire, had been little researched so far. In this field especially, he tracked down new sources and his innovative studies paved the way for and opened new horizons for a realistic understanding of the role of science and learning in the more recent periods of Islamic learning. Between 1994 and 2002, he edited The History of the Ottoman State, Society and Culture in 2 volumes and 3 languages, Turkish, Arabic, and English, of course. Later, it was translated into Russian, Bosnian, and a number of other languages. The book contains a wide range of contributions written by leading Turkish historians of the Ottoman Empire. It aimed at giving a realistic, comprehensive, and modern view of the Ottoman Empire to the educated and general reader. His own contributions, dealing with the Ottoman educational and scholarly scientific institutions and the Ottoman scientific scholarly literature on more than 200 pages, were innovative as they observed Ottoman history from a little-known angle. As his topics were new and essential for a better understanding of Ottoman society, he was often invited internationally to scholarly meetings. In April 1998, for example, he read a paper entitled The Ottoman Madrasas and the Teaching of Jurisprudence at a symposium held here at Harvard Law School. I was his discussant. Apart from his individual works, Professor İhsanoğlu, as mentioned before, brought into being an impressive number of research projects to which he mostly contributed himself and which he edited. The most important one was the monumental history of Ottoman scientific literature, published in 18 volumes, among them volumes containing the history of Ottoman astronomic literature, history of Ottoman mathematical literature, history of Ottoman geographical literature, and the history of Ottoman musical literature. During these years, Professor İhsanoğlu engaged in numerous activities beyond the university and İRCİKA. He was founder and chairman of the Turkish Society for the History of Science, president of the International Union of History and Philosophy of Science, and vice president of Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage, as we already have heard. He also has been asked to act as member of the board of an impressive number of institutions in different countries. In 1948, he had been appointed to a full professorship in chemistry at the University of Istanbul. Combining his capacities and his competence in the natural sciences on the one hand, and in history and cultural on the other hand, Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu in the same year founded the first Department of History of Science in Turkey at the Faculty of Letters, University of Istanbul, and he was the head of it until its early and deplorable end in 2000. In 2003, however, he taught the history of education, learning, and science at the University of Munich, after having accepted the invitation of becoming the first Allianz visiting professor for Islamic studies, a brief professorship sponsored by the Allianz Group, insightfully observing that after 9/11 it was necessary to do something to improve the understanding between the Islamic world and the West. Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu was at home in the world of Islam, and he also had come to know the West. And as a critical, open-minded, modern scholar and reasonable man, able to differentiate, he was the born intermediary between cultures. Not only did the students and colleagues profit from his stay, the Munich-based Society of Friends of Islamic Art and Culture gratefully elected him as an honorary member. Although his foremost duty as Director General of IRGICA had been research into the history and culture of Islam, his position to a certain degree also had been the post of a diplomat. The way he was dealing with this double task was acknowledged and made him known about the governments of the 57 members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. In 2005, he was democratically elected Secretary General of the organization. This was another turning point. He now resided in Jeddah as a diplomat, a politician, and an international administrator representing the OIC globally. He continued, however, to be a scholar, and so he wrote a book about the OIC. He had successfully reorganized and stabilized the OIC and was re-elected for a second term in office, which ended in 2014. Professor İhsanoğlu has received many, I think about 40, awards and medals from presidents and institutions at home and internationally. He was also made an honorary doctor from more than 20 universities and was elected member of academies, for example, the Academia Europaea. He had become an internationally prominent personality. When, however, he agreed to run for president of the Turkish Republic in 2013 elections as candidate for the opposition parties, he became an active politician in a field new to him, the battlefield of Turkish party politics. As the situation was, as it was, the 38.44% of the votes he got was an amazing success for him, but they were not enough to win the elections. In the following year, however, he was elected as a member of parliament in Istanbul. However, already after one term in parliament, he decided to leave the field of politics. Now he found time to complete the biography of his admired father he had been preparing for decades, and he returned to his old love, the history of education, learning, and science in the Ottoman Empire. What were the matrices and what weren't they? He asked, was the question he discussed in a book published in 2019. But most importantly, he prepared a book in 3 volumes based on his main project, the monumental history of Ottoman literature of science that he had published in 18 volumes. In a way, This main project had renewed the Ottoman tradition of biographical dictionaries and the bibliography of Khatib Çelebi. Aims and methods, of course, differ, and none of the Ottoman works is equal to the 18 volumes edited by Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu. His project aimed at bringing together the writings of the ulema in the field of science, accompanied, if possible, by biographical notes. The volumes contain the exact titles of all the sharhs and risales and manuscripts of books, and he and his collaborators had found in libraries all over the world. The extant manuscripts, their dates and the names of the copies and their prints are registered, and information about their contents is given. These 18 volumes are of great service to those who do research on Ottoman science and culture. Nobody had known about the great number of writings that had been produced in that field of knowledge in the lands of the former Ottoman Empire during the centuries. This huge fund now allows orientation, challenges to ask new questions, and makes specialized research much easier. To summarize the contents of these 18 volumes, he wrote Osmanlı Bilim Mirası, the first volume, as a general introduction in the history, the development, and the problems of the topic. For the second volume, he selected 370 authors and their works, and in addition, anonymous works on 38 pages. Today and tomorrow, we are going to celebrate and discuss the English edition, published in 3 volumes by the Al-Furqan Foundation and translated by Maryam Patton. And we do this within the framework of the wide field of Islamic and Ottoman science and history. If he were an Ottoman alim, he would have been called El-Mevla El-Fazıl vel-Üstad El-Kamil İhsanzade Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu by the biographers.
Yes.
But living in post-Ottoman times, we justly honor him as a scholar with an outstanding and admirable pioneering work. Above all, however, and although born in Cairo, he has, as I see it, become one of the very rare Istanbul Efendisies. Thank you very much.
A moving tribute. Thank you very much. All of the books mentioned and more are on display. Please do not leave the room without taking a look at the display in the back. Not only the recent publication that we have been and we shall be speaking about, the Ottoman Scientific Heritage in 3 volumes, but also many of Professor İhsanoğlu's publications in Turkish and English and Russian translations and various other sorts. Professor İhsanoğlu himself told me that Widener happens to have the best collection of all the works with his imprint on it, and we're very, very happy and proud to have that. Thank you. Now to introduce our chair of the round table that we are about to start, I will also read to you the pages I prepared for his biography, but he's well known to many of you, and Professor Carter Findlay is also one of the first Harvard Ottomanists. He received his degree here, and thereafter, for that generation, a rare thing in Northern America, both in the US and Canada, he became an Ottomanist. And recently, he retired as Humanities Distinguished Professor Emeritus in the History Department at Ohio State University, where he also trained many students. His area of research is the history of Islamic civilization, with emphasis on the Ottoman Empire and the modern Middle East. He also co-founded Ohio State's World History Program. Carter Findlay earned his BA from Yale University and his PhD from Harvard. His most recently published book is Enlightening Europe on Islam and the Ottomans, Muradja Dosson and his Masterpiece, published by Brill in 2019, which is a book on Dosson's career, late 18th century character, between Europe and the Ottoman world, and his Tableau Général de l'Empire Ottoman. Findlay's other publications include Turkey, Islam, Nationalism, and Modernity, a History, 1789 to 2007, which was published in 2010 and won several prizes, including Joseph Rothschild Prize from the Association for the Study of Nationalism. His book, The Turks in World History, was published by Oxford University Press in 2005 and won the British Kuwait Friendship Society Prize for Middle East Studies. A major article in the field, An Ottoman Occidentalist in Europe, Ahmet Mithat Meets Madame Gülnar, 1889, was published in 1998. His groundbreaking books were Bureaucratic Reform in the Ottoman Empire, The Sublime Porte, 1789-1922, published in 1980, soon after his dissertation and based on it, and then Ottoman Civil Officialdom, A Social History, which also won both the Ohio Academy of History Book Award and the Mehmet Fuat Köprülü Book Prize of the Turkish Studies Association in 1989. All of Professor Findlay's monographs have been translated into Turkish. Turks in World History has also been translated into Japanese and Chinese. Professor Findlay is currently an honorary member of both the Turkish Academy of Sciences and the Turkish Historical Society, and his newest book, good news here, A History of the Ottoman Empire, is now being edited for publication. Professor Findlay, the floor is yours.
Astaghfirullah. Thank you. See if I can get cozy with the microphone. One of the greatest rewards of my career has been my long professional acquaintance and friendship with Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu. His accomplishments so far outstrip my own that I can find only a few partial similarities. First, we are within 2 years of being the same age. Second, we both engaged in academic entrepreneurship. Third, we both value Arabic as highly as Turkish and Ottoman studies. Yet this point is not in my favor. I took my first Arabic course as a graduate student at Harvard and never achieved the mastery I wanted. Ekmel Hoca's entire life embodies Arabo-Turkish bilingualism. There can be no aspect of Ottoman and Islamic studies that has progressed more in the last 50 years than the history of science. For students of my generation, the only thing we had to read was Abdülhak Adnan Adıvar's Osmanlı Türklerinde İlim from 1943. At that stage, my knowledge of Turkish was so rudimentary that I probably spent more time looking up words in the dictionary than understanding the arguments of the book. Consequently, it probably did not blight my mind too badly. There was no Islamic science. There was only Arab science, and that stopped in the medieval period. No one has done more to correct that idea than Ekmel Hoca has. In fact, it would be difficult to find a scholar in any field who has accomplished more. No one can do justice to all his accomplishments, but please allow me to mention ones that have stood out to me. The circumstances of his early years in Egypt led him to take a biobibliographical approach that enabled him to discover worlds of Ottoman and Turkish literary production in Egypt. His book, The Turks in Egypt, Their Cultural Legacy of 2012, has inspired one of my own students' dissertation. Not every scholar has to become an entrepreneur and institution builder. In my case, there would be no credible program in Ottoman studies at my university if I had not started working for that purpose from my very first day as an assistant professor in 1972. Hearing the dean say no is the first sign that you have got his attention. Here again, Ekmel Hoxha's accomplishments outstrip mine by light years. I've visited him and his students at the History of Science Department at Istanbul University, and we enjoyed a memorable lunch at the nearby Çiğ Köfte restaurant. I'm glad I got there in time for that. Even more momentous were Ekmel Hoxha's years of leadership at İrsika. How many great projects have been launched there and brought to fulfillment. I myself contributed papers to conferences in the 1980s. The range of activities from restoring monuments in Bosnia to promoting Arabic calligraphy, something I love, and their importance for Islamic studies is beyond compare. His Arabo-Turkish biculturalism and entrepreneurial and institution building made his years in Jeddah a natural extension from his work at İrsika. So they seem to me. I remember explaining this to my students by saying, it's like an Islamic UN. Ekmel Hoxha has been compared to Hezarfen, the man of 1,000 arts, and other greats in Ottoman history. Recent findings in my own research sensitized me to another great for comparison. It may surprise you if I mention Ibrahim Müteferrika, the founder of Ottoman typography and book printing. However, he was also bicultural. He came from Transylvania, a place where Protestant Christianity flourished. That is, it flourished as long as the Ottomans were in control there and not the Austrians. When he was growing up there, 3 different Protestant sects competed for influence and followers, and they conducted the competition largely through print production. So Ottoman Transylvania in that period was a hotbed of publication in the local language for Protestants. After Ibrahim Müteferrika's conversion and assimilation of Ottoman learned culture, it was natural for him to want to do in Istanbul what he had seen done in Transylvania. The problem was he was responding to a demand that was not there yet. He was ahead of his time, witnessed that Ottoman printing did take off 50 years after him. Luckily, change has accelerated incredibly since the 18th century. Ekmel Hoxha has seen his initiatives succeed on a scale unimaginable to most scholars. However, he has also paid a price for being ahead of his time, witness the fate of the Istanbul University Department of History of Science Department. So, I think it's just impossible to cite anyone who has accomplished more despite having to endure that kind of disappointment along the way. Just never give up. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor İhsanoğlu. Thank you, Professor Findlay. The floor is now with our guest of honor, dear Professor İhsanoğlu.
Well, I would like to start by expressing my gratitude and gratefulness to the 2 institutions, Harvard University Center for Middle Studies and Al-Furqan Foundation, in the name of Professor Jamal Kafadar and Mr. Ahmed Sharaf Yamani. It has been a long time I have been associated with the two institutions. But I would like to say that, as Mr. Sharaf has explained, my association with Al-Furqan was from day one. My association with this Middle East Studies Center started in the 90s when the administration of the center decided to move towards Turkey and Iran. On those days where mainly it was on the Arab part of the Middle East and the conflict, etc., etc. So I was asked to sit on the advisory board for the center, where I think under the able leadership of Bill Graham, we managed, or they managed, to establish Turkish Studies Chair, where was financed by Koch family, and where, with the blessing of God, Professor Jamal Kafadar came, and he has been it has been a center of attraction. In our dealings with the Center for Middle East Studies, I invited the board, the advisory board, to a meeting in Istanbul. It was in the Irsika, in the Yıldız Palace pavilions. And that was the first encounter between our young generation researchers, students, and Harvard University. And Harvard University proved to be a good magnet to attract brilliant young scholars who I see some of faces here among us. That was my first association with Harvard Center for Middle East Studies. He being at Harvard for a historian of science means different things. Association with different academic institutions could always be acknowledged, but for historians of science, it is a Mecca. It is the birthplace of history of science, where George Sarton, a Belgian chemist, when he crossed the Atlantic, became a historian of science. And he established the first academic discipline here, and his journal is ISIS and Osiris, etc. The most attractive aspect of Sarton, from my point of view, that he, when he was not a young man, when he started writing the second volume, I think, of his monumental work, History of Science, he felt the need to learn Arabic. And he went to the Middle East to study Arabic, and he wrote aspects of that in his book, where he considers the Islamic contribution to science the most progressive in the Middle Ages. So my association comes with the founder of our discipline, and his target to establish the new humanism, where two sciences or two understanding of science are looking for a bridge to convene the bondage between them. What has been called later generation by Lord Snow, two cultures, the science and the humanities. So he was one of the first people to address this question. But of course, with all respect to him and homage I pay for him, I don't agree on his theory of the golden age, that there was a golden age of Islamic science and then the decline. And our book and our activities all about this. So, having said this, I would like to move to the story, how this 18 volumes and how these 3 volumes came about. In 1980, when I was asked by the OIC and the Turkish government to establish IRSICA, I moved from Ankara to Istanbul and I couldn't move my laboratory, so I have to abandon chemistry. And I started many projects for the history of Islamic art and culture, as Professor Meyer has very kindly explained. But I looked to my own interest, history of science. There was nothing. And when I looked around, it was the prevailing wisdom was what Adnan Adwar was saying. And my question had, Ottomans have all these great achievements in arts, in architecture, in poetry, in this and that, and how come they don't have such parallel achievements in sciences? I started my own research. I was doing a study of how modern chemistry, post-Lavoisier chemistry, was transferred to the Ottoman lands in 1 century period. And then I was also invited in 1984 to Cambridge to attend a meeting of what is known as CEPO, Comité International pour les Études Ottomanes et Pro-Ottoman. I gave a paper on the reception of modern sciences and the attitude of Ottoman ulama. And I proved, or I need not to prove, but I put on the table examples of how they helped, how they supported, and how they taught in different schools these sciences. And that the paradigm created by Adnan Adwar was not correct. That paper initiated a good discussion, and it was appreciated by people, senior people like Professor Inalcık and Kemal Karpat, etc. At Harvard, at Cambridge, I wanted to see one of the great historians of our time, Professor Joseph Needham, the author of Chinese Science and Technology in China. I went to visit him in his place and witnessed how he was working, and we had certain discussions. I came back with an inspiration to Istanbul, but I didn't know what to do, because science and technology in China was a sophisticated history of Chinese culture. And in our position, this was not possible, because we don't have trained people and people who studied Ottoman science. So we have to. So after 1 year of thinking, discussing, examining, I made the decision that we need 3 acts. First, we have to prepare an inventory of Ottoman science. Second, we have to do research on certain topics. Third, we have to enlist scholars to study these aspects from inside and from outside. 1984, I managed to establish the first department of history of science in Turkey. And there we started a master's degree, PhD degree on these sciences, on these topics. And from outside, through the International Union for History of Science and the panels and the sessions there, we introduced this subject, and scholars from outside our own country started to do this. Then the first step in preparing the inventory was to scan collections of manuscripts, where manuscripts written on mathematics, on astronomy, on physics and chemistry, and etc., would be located. We started with the libraries in Turkey, and then we started to expand outside Turkey. The Balkans were Ottoman provinces, in the Middle East, etc. And we trained a young generation of catalogers, and they produced wonderful work. At the end of the whole project, we had 500 collection of manuscripts in 52 countries. And we attested 20,000 book work on these disciplines and around 5,000 scholars in the 600 years of the Ottoman era. So we started working in 85, and the database accumulated. This is, mind you, it was before the internet was invented, you see. So it has a big labor here. The first volume, we started 1985. The first volume the first book on astronomy was 2 volumes, and it was published in 1997, meaning 12 years it took us to produce the first book, 12 years. Then from 1997 to 2011, 14 years, we published the rest of the series, 16 volumes. So the publication of these volumes created an interest all over the world. I remember Nature magazine in that year published a leading article on the project and refuting all decline theories and similar assumptions, and have a title of Ottoman Science Never Eclipsed. Professor Sabra from here, he had very interesting comments on the issue. David King from Frankfurt University on astronomy and mathematics wrote a wonderful review in ISIS. So the project was well received and well appreciated. Now when we come, the 18 volumes, as I said, demanded from me, and I was asked by colleagues, look, this is one wonderful work, monumental, but we need to have a more helpful introduction and analysis. So I started working on this. After finishing, please, when you use these 18 volumes, there is always in the beginning a sort of history of that discipline in the Ottoman time, with certain analysis, with certain little figures, etc. So with the help of these introductions, long introductions, I tried to establish the heritage book. Now the heritage book, as it already explained, is consisted of 3 volumes. The first volume, and second and third. The second and third, they are catalogs. You have the name of the scholar, you have his books, account on his career, and bibliography. But the first one is the one needs your attention. It is the first, the introduction or Muqaddimah is in 6 chapters. The first chapter is on the foundation of Islamic culture, scholarly milieu in pre-Ottoman Anatolia. Pre-Ottoman Anatolia, Seljuk Turks, the principalities, and nomads coming and establishing, and then they are surrounded by, or the way through they came from Central Asia, they went through Iran, etc., and Arab provinces. So the Selçukid period witnessed a wide range of establishing madrasas in Anatolia. On the contrary of Cairo, for instance, in Egypt, all madrasas are in Cairo, and the same in Damascus, mainly in Damascus, some in Halab, Baghdad the same, but in Anatolia, in the Selçukid period and later in the Ottoman period, they were widespread, and this really is fantastic, and it led to the expansion of Islamic culture in this geography. Of course, then there were the Maraga school. Maraga Observatory was also an attractive core or attractive magnet where scholars from Anatolia went to Maraga as they went to Damascus, as they went to Cairo, etc. So the pre-Ottoman century was a kind of preparation. When we come to the second chapter, as I mentioned, the influence of centers of culture, advanced places like in Egypt, in Syria, in Iran, in Central Asia, was influential. When we come to the second chapter, the rise of Ottoman scientific tradition, we find that Ottoman sultans were very keen to support and give patronage to the scholars, and they started to attract big scholars from all centers, from Syria, from Egypt, from even Andalusia. There were scholars who came and lived in the Ottoman or in the Turkic environment. Well, in this period, you have formation period. You have current streams who are at the end join at a big river, and then we have two important sources of scholars who joined the Ottoman Exodus, the fall of Granada, and the Jewish scholars who came to the Ottoman lands. Then, after Shah Ismail Safavids, forcing the people to be Shiite, many scholars left Persia or Iran and came to the Ottoman lands. This important contributions enriched the Ottoman literature. When we come to in the classical period, we find that, as I said, madrasas were widespread. In the Ottoman case, whenever they conquer a land, after a certain period of time, they start establishing madrasas, where in madrasas, the common Islamic culture would be inculcated, and a new elite of Ottoman, say, Ottoman Hungarians or Bosnians becomes Muslim, and they share the values with the same other Ottomans who are belonging to Arab land or to Turkish land, etc. In the madrasas, in the history of madrasas, I have been emphasizing one point. And before this, I mean in the history of formation of Islamic culture, in the transmission of pre-Islamic Greek sciences, ulum al-awail, I rely here on a theory of late Professor Sabra. Professor Sabra says that transmission of Greek science was not a mere reception of these sciences. And he considers two stages. The first stage is appropriation, and the second is naturalization. I think this is okay, and this is right. It is not a matter of translation, simple translation. It was more than that, which he summarizes is adaptation and naturalization. I propose a third phase, which is integration. And I would advise you to read Tashköprüzade's Miftah al-Saada. Tashköprüzade Miftah al-Saada is not only a key for happiness, but it's a key for understanding. And luckily, Furqan Foundation is about publishing a critical edition, the first critical edition of Miftah al-Saada. In Miftah al-Saada, in Tashköprüzade, when he classifies the sciences, he brings more than Ghazali, Ibn Khaldun, etc., between rational sciences and traditional sciences. علوم عقلية, نقلية. He adds to them علوم يقينية, علوم يقينية, and he considers all of them in one ontological framework and epistemological framework. I think this understanding happened in the Ottoman lands. And when we read the history of madrasas or the deeds of madrasas from pre-Fatih time, and Qanuni's time, you find that there is difference. And this is a step towards going to integration. So that is on the madrasas, which is the classical institution of learning. In the modernization, we have the military schools, and where we have, for the first time, teaching European language. In Ottoman classic time, no European language, not because of anything, because they just did not need it. And whenever they need it for state affairs, for relationship with the others, they have the dragomans. But later on, when the balance of power between the Ottomans and Europeans went against them, they started to look, we have to learn these languages, etc. And this is how Katib Chalabi expresses his keen interest in translation. And later on, Shani Zada or Tazkere Köse Ibrahim, etc. This is how it started. So that is the third chapter. And the fourth chapter is an overview of Ottoman scientific literature. This is, I don't need to go to explanation here, but I will have the fifth and the sixth. Let me first go to the sixth chapter on the modernization in science and technology. I adopted here a different yardstick by comparing Ottomans, Russians, Chinese, and Japanese. Ottomans and Russians were Euro-Asians, neighbors of the advanced European countries, and they had to learn this, and I compared the two. Chinese and Japanese, Far East, the same. And of course, the differences which I speak about, but I hope that this will open a discussion, because I think this is a new way. This is an attempt to answer Joseph Needham's question, that powder, compass, and what is this? Compass, powder, print, they are Chinese by origin, but why they didn't make the effect that they did when they came to Europe and they produced the scientific revolution. This is a question, big question by Joseph Needham. I tried in a humble way to answer this. Coming to the last one, which is the fifth chapter, about the profile of Ottoman science and statistic values. You see, I said in the beginning that we have
in the folders.
5,000, almost 5,000 scholars who lived in the Ottoman time. And we have around 20,000 works, translations, adaptations, sharh, hashiyah, etc., etc. But we have made tables. This is an example of the chronological and subject distribution of all attested authors. You can see here two columns, the one on the left, far left, and one on the far right. On the left, you have the centuries. The first Ottoman century is 13th century. It goes up to 14th century, it goes up to the 20th century. And then you have these disciplines: astronomy, mathematics, geography, music, military science, natural science, medicine, astrology, classification of science. You see that, don't take in consideration 13 that was meant for other things, but 14. 14th century, when you go right all the way, it is, the total of books produced in 14th century is 12 books. 12 books. When you go to 15th century, from 12 to 128. Quite a bit. Then 338. This means a gradual, and the 14th century was a century of incubation and in the establishment of scholarly environment. It was in formative stage. When you go, we go to table number 4. Table number 4 is on the distribution of authors by subject and geographic origin, the origin of the scholars. Here we look to the left, the first column at left, the places where origin of scholars. You have Istanbul, Anatolia, Egypt, Balkans, Syria, North Africa, Mediterranean islands, Iraq, etc. And you find, when you come to the totals on the right side, you find that by origin, the scholars, number of scholars belong to Istanbul are 816. Anatolia 735. Egypt 338. Balkans 335. Look, Balkans was not an old Muslim geography. It became Muslim geography with the Ottomans. So whatever you see here is a mixture of Muslims by origin or Muslim by conversion who participated in scientific life. When we look totals, which is in the text of the book, the scholars who are coming from old places like Egypt, like Syria, you find that they are 30%. And those who come from new lands, as I express, 65%. We're including islands, Mediterranean islands, which the Ottomans called Jazairi Bahri Safid. When you come to table 8, which indicates the distribution of authors by subject and locus to which they belonged. The places where big number of travels happened is Anatolia, 911. Then the Balkans, 446. Syria, 359. Europe, 612. Istanbul, 278. Hijaz, 196. So here we find a different case. Istanbul is not the highest. It's Anatolia, it's the Balkan. I think, Professor Meyer, this is because of the Ilmiya movement, of Ilmiya promotion, and then they have to be sent to other mahkamas, etc., or other madrasas. And this is why Istanbul is where they live, but where they are appointed in different places, that's what counts in our inventory. My last table out of these statistics, they are about 15 or 16. I'm just giving a glimpse of them. This one on the distribution of subject of texts containing languages other than Al-Sinai Salasa. Now, I didn't talk about Al-Sinai Salasa. Al-Sinai Salasa means 3 languages. 3 languages the Ottoman scholars had to learn. Arab, of course, they talk, their mother tongue is Turkish. And in madrasas, they learn Arabic, grammar, Arabic rhetorics, everything on Arabic literature. And then, of course, rational sciences and traditional sciences. But there's no teaching of Turkish. In madrasas, no teach. And the textbook they have, it's all in Arabic. But of course, the teachers or the mudarrises, the ulama were mainly Turks. So they teach, by mixing, they teach the language. And in bureaucracy, it was Turkish, etc. So there was other ways of learning Turkish. Here is there is another table where the Al-Sinai Salasa, the language of the book, of the different works. Here, this is the language of books are written in language other than Al-Sinai Salasa. So you have French, you have English, you have different German, Latin, etc., etc. And this is, you can look to it at later stage. Afterwards, you have a list of scientific works translated during the Ottoman Empire. You find here Arabic to French, Arabic to Persian, Arabic to Turkish. Arabic to Turkish is 211. And this is the second. The first is French to Turkish on the left side or left column. French to Turkish, 596. And then, of course, there is translation from Latin to Arabic, from Hebrew to Arabic. And this is all waiting for scholars to study them. My last presentation here is on the quantitative development of books written in 3 languages, let's say so, Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. At the 14th century, you find that Turkish is the third, Arabic is the first, Persian is second. And then the trend of Arabic and let's put it this way, the Persian diminishes. The Persian diminishes. And the Turkish increases. And after a certain point, no Persian, because of many reasons. One among them, that Iran became Shiite under the Safavids, and Central Asia lost its glamour in producing after Ulubay's killing. So it was mainly in Persian from Central Asia. You see here that Turkish made a big rise in the 18th century and became more than Arabic. Arabic increases but stops at certain point. Turkish in the 18th century, it makes high. Why? Not because of the establishment of metaphorical printing, no. Establishment of military schools. Military schools, you have texts to be printed, texts translated from European languages, and these are textbooks. Now, at the end of my presentation, let me say that the book, the Ottoman Scientific,
The book.
it was only 270 scholars and certain texts. These are the most eminent among the 5,000 people. We tried to establish an inventory of. I think now we can easily accept that Ottomans has science. Huh? Thank you very much. Well, end of the presentation, I have to mention that I am grateful to Professor Jamal Kafadar for answering my question when I said, Professor Kafadar, I need somebody to translate this book. He, without hesitation, he said, Maryam will do it. And it happened to be really, this would have not, English edition would have not been possible without a translator who is familiar with a plethora of issues related to Turkish, Arabic, and Persian studies, and who is comfortable in handling references in different European languages. Maryam Patton was the best choice to tackle these challenges. Working with her for the past 3 years enabled me to improve certain parts of the text and to adjust transliterations of personal and place names that were written in different languages. So, thank you, Maryam.
I was just about to introduce Maryam, to give us her comments. You all realize that the program continues tomorrow, I hope. Not in this space, but we have a full day with 4 speakers in the morning. They are with us here, Cemil Aydın, Tunç Şen, and Nüket Varlık, and Tuncay Zorlu will join us on Zoom. He couldn't get a visa, not on time anyway. Sally Shehsivari, who was also part of the working group, and he spent more time than anyone else perhaps, had a similar problem. Unfortunately, this is huge right now for all kinds of international scholarly activities, and we need to be aware. I just wanted to bring it to our attention. We are, but nonetheless, we should speak about it and vocalize. It's just becoming, when we have a translation like this, which is a great, momentous service to world scholarly community, or works that nobody knew until a few decades ago, then they were known only in Turkish for a few decades, and now we have them available in English. While the scholarly world is doing, I think, whatever it can and more, given new technologies with new foundations that serve these needs, The governments, especially of the Western world, have become just too stingy, to say the least, with visas, and I hope, and more actually, but I hope we really continue to vocalize this. We hopefully can do something soon before all these efforts to internationalize our scholarly lives meet such hard limits.
I just forgot to mention that during the preparation of this meeting, the contribution of Salih Shahswari from Al-Furqan, the executive director of Furqan Foundation, is great, and we owe whatever success we have today to his great enthusiasm and follow-up and the wonderful administration. So I just wanted not to be amiss and to mention him. Thank you.
Thank you. I can use this and then maybe Maryam.
Sure. I think this one works, right? Yeah, okay.
Maryam Patton is a soon-to-graduate PhD candidate in the Joint History and Middle Eastern Studies program at Harvard University. She is particularly interested in the exchange of ideas, people, and books across the Mediterranean during the early modern period. Some of her earlier research addressed these questions through the lens of the history of astronomy in the Ottoman Empire and English Oriental historiography in the 17th century. She received her master's in European history from Oxford University, where she was an Ertegün scholar. She holds a bachelor's degree in history from Princeton University. Her dissertation, still unfolding, but coming to a close, examines the historical understanding of time and temporality in the late medieval and early modern Ottoman Empire and belongs to the growing body of literature on the cultural history of time and temporality. Her dissertation has been supported by grants and fellowships from the Fulbright Commission, the Renaissance Society of America, the Delmas Foundation, Villa Itatti, and several others. She has written and presented on the first Ottoman encounters with Copernican heliocentrism, which was also her senior thesis topic at Princeton, English Oriental historiography in the 17th century, and the history of Arabic printing in Italy. Maryam, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I only have a few comments really to say, and let me reiterate my thanks and gratitude to all our friends and colleagues for being here. It's very lovely to host you at Harvard, our home turf, so to speak, and so close to the very steps of Seaver Hall, where the plan that I might translate the Ottoman Scientific Heritage was first hatched. Only a few weeks ago, our dear events coordinator Liz Flanagan, who I want to thank again for her heroic efforts, we're chatting about this event and planning, and she asked very astutely, Maryam, wasn't your advisor annoyed or worried about you taking on this translation project in terms of, distracting you from the dissertation? And I smiled, because as you've probably intuited by now, it was his idea in the first place. I will forever be grateful to my advisor's faith and confidence in me, and there were plenty of moments over the years when I began to doubt or worry that this translation would ever see the light of day. So I'm grateful for his continued patience. Thank you. And I also want to take this opportunity to point out that 3/4 of my committee members are here, so I'm promising you now, in front of everyone publicly, that I'm not taking on any other projects between now and submitting. That's it. This is the last thing. So, the translation project began in earnest in the spring of 2019. I was living in Istanbul that year on a Fulbright Hayes Fellowship in an apartment suspiciously conveniently close to Ekmeleddin's office. Our usual routine involved me translating on my own, sending about 40 to 50 pages over email, then meeting on usually a Thursday or Friday morning at 9 a.m. or 9:30 if I was especially tired, and we would go over the translation together. I would recite my translation, pausing whenever he wanted to adjust my phrasing or to suggest a correction to my translation, and there were plenty of moments where I mistranslated something. There was a lovely traditional quality to the nature of this oral recitation, almost like a madrasa education. And hearing my translation as I recited it brought into relief the importance of the sound of the words in English in a way that we often overlook when we are used to reading silently. Our regular weekly meetings were a welcome source of structure and stability in the otherwise structureless year of the archival year abroad, which those of you who've gone through the PhD gauntlet understand, where without any sort of deadlines, it just felt like an amorphous mass. And at the time, I had only the faintest outlines of a dissertation project about Ottoman conceptions of time, which mercifully has become far more defined in the meantime. And although my translation work for this book only rarely directly added to my dissertation research, the scientific topics covered in the volumes are vast, and only occasionally were there a nugget that I could sort of save for my dissertation, mainly because of the scope of the book being so large. But it was still very gratifying to have something so clearly defined to be working towards. Unlike many of the ways that time was conceptualized amongst the subjects of my dissertation, this translation project was a purely linear project. I started from page 1 and proceeded page by page until the very end, 1,600 pages later, not counting the bibliographies. There was a simplicity of purpose and a clear end goal. Of course, when it came to revising what I had translated during my meetings with Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu, we would sometimes go around in circles, struggling to really capture the right English phrasing, toying with different versions, taking a lunch break to sort of reflect on it, taking walks in the garden near his office, and then come back and finally decide, all right, what are we choosing to go forward with? And after that year of in-person meetings, we switched to an online format. I'd left Turkey, which was just as well because COVID hit only a few months later. And again, with no ability to go to the archives or even leave my apartment for that matter, I filled my days with translation. Slowly but surely, about 3 years later, after multiple read-throughs, we finished. There was still a matter of formatting and diacritics, which extended the labor another year, but the translation itself finished in 2022, when the idea to host a celebration here at Harvard took shape at my wedding in Istanbul. So here we are, celebrating both the conclusion of this long effort and Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu's long and illustrious academic career. What the experience of translating these volumes and working with Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu has taught me, above all, is to approach my sources and texts with far more humility than I ever did before. The historians in this, and not just historians, all kinds of scholars, but mostly, particularly historians in this room, engage in translation almost every single time we encounter a primary source, and almost every time the author of that text is not living. Our sources don't get to speak back. They don't get to clarify a vague point. They don't have the opportunity to correct the occasional mistake or to have an opinion on how you translated their words. Translating the Ottoman Scientific Heritage with more or less unrestricted access to the source himself, WhatsApp was our usual form of communication, really put into relief how difficult it can be to truly understand a source text in its proper context, and that we should all heed the sage advice by the late, great Harvard College's Shinasi Tekin, whom I unfortunately never knew, but who said, if you don't know a word, look it up. If you do know a word, look it up twice. I actually first heard that expression not at Harvard, but years prior when I was a junior at Princeton, from my teacher Jack Tanous, who's a historian of late antiquity. He supposedly heard it from Peter Brown. I need to chase down this chain of transmission.
That would be right.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so it spreads beyond the mere Oriental circles of Harvard. Nevertheless, whether or not you're an Ottomanist, the advice is sound. And after my experience as a translator, I humbly might tack on a third suggestion. Once you've decided on the word, try the others on for size too. The Turkish word for translation, tercüme, comes from the Arabic root tarjama. And tarjama is a little unusual as far as Arabic verbs go because it's a quadriliteral root. It contains 4 root letters rather than the far more common 3. But what I've always admired about this verb, if one can do such a thing, admire verbs, was that it carried an additional meaning besides to translate, and that's to write a biography. I believe there's something deeply poetic about the connection between translating from one language to another and the idea that to write a biography is to translate a life lived into words that others can read. And I don't think it would be a stretch to suggest that the 18 volumes of the Ottoman Scientific Literature series, of which you've heard discussions of throughout, and of which this book represents a kind of synthesis, forms part of Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu's legacy and life work. In that sense, my translation provided, I hope, an additional entry to his already vast academic and professional biography. It was an honor and a privilege to work with you, and I'm very grateful I had this opportunity to formally thank you for entrusting me with this contribution to Ottoman studies and to the history of science. And a common theme throughout many of the talks given just now, and the point I want to end on, was the theme of biculturalism, both of Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu's personal upbringing and more generally. And it made me realize that there is one more person I should be thanking in hindsight, who's not here unfortunately, but she's my mother. She's living, she's just not here physically in this room. I grew up bilingual, Turkish-English, but you wouldn't be able to tell it from my name. There's nothing Turkish about the way my name is spelled or written out. So I've always considered myself an incognito Turk in some ways. And when I became an Ottomanist, when I formally started studying Ottoman studies, I also felt a pang of maybe guilt over the fact that I got Turkish for free, essentially. I'd always admire my fellow grad students who didn't grow up speaking Turkish, how they learned Turkish, and I thought, wow, you're so talented. Like, I didn't have to work for it, because my mother taught me, she raised me bilingually, so I'm grateful to her, so thank you, and this wouldn't have been possible were it not for her. And I also think now that 1,600 pages later, I've paid my dues in terms of learning Turkish for free. So the debt is paid. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The debt is paid if your mother approves. And I will now turn to our final speaker in the panel, Hannah Marcus, a colleague here in the Department of the History of Science, who has been working with us and our students so kindly and so generously. I can say I've come to know her quite well, and I appreciate very much how she herself builds bridges between different areas in early modern history of science. And it is with that admirable role that we've come to admire and cherish, we've invited Hannah Marcus to speak to us regarding this book, what it says to her, and how we might then take it further in terms of what we hope will be a developing conversation between history of science and historical studies in general in the Ottoman field and in the European fields. Hannah is the John and Ruth Hazel Associate Professor of the Social Sciences in the Department of the History of Science and the Interim Faculty Director of the Collection of Historical Scientific Instruments at Harvard University, a remarkable collection for those interested if they ever have time. Her research focuses on the scientific culture of early modern Europe between 1400 and 1700. Professor Marcus earned her BA at the University of Pennsylvania and her PhD at Stanford University in 2016. I just found out this morning that she wrote a paper while studying at Stanford on Cem Sultan. At Harvard, she teaches courses on the early history of science, medicine and the body, communication technologies, and the relationship between faith and science. Professor Marcus's first book, Forbidden Knowledge, Medicine, Science, and Censorship in Early Modern Italy, was published by the University of Chicago Press in 2020. And it was awarded the Morris D. Forkosh Prize for the best first book in intellectual history by the Journal of the History of Ideas, and the Helen and Howard R. Marraro Prize in Italian History by the American Catholic Historical Association. Professor Marcus is also the translator of the 16th century apothecary, Camilla Apothecary.
Erculiani.
No, but apothecary.
Yes.
Yeah. That word suddenly threw me off. Camilla Erculiani's Letters on Natural Philosophy, 1584, when the letters were written, which was recognized with an honorable mention for the Scholarly Edition in Translation Award by the Society for the Study of Early Modern Women and Gender. Her second book, Methuselah's Children, The Renaissance discovery of old age is on its way. I know she's been working on old age. Professor Marcus engages in digital humanities research through her work on Galileo. With Paula Findlin, she's writing a book about Galileo's correspondence called Galileo's Letters, Experiments in Friendship, which grows out of their collaboration on the Galileo Correspondence Project. With her colleague Alan Brandt, she also directs the new online resource, History of Contagion, in Harvard Library collections. Without further ado, Professor Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for including me. It's my absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to thank Professor İhsanoğlu in person for his illuminating research and to thank Maryam Patton for all of her hard work in making it available in English. I'm an Italianist. As I was reflecting on what I wanted to say this evening, it occurred to me that I think I'm the only speaker in this symposium who hasn't already encountered this work in the Turkish. So this is my first read through these volumes. And I'm going to seize this unique position as the only first-time reader here to share a few of my impressions and some of the ideas that the Ottoman Scientific Heritage has inspired in me. So first, I found reading these volumes to be actually thrilling. The range of people, ideas, geography, and time that they open up is incredibly impressive. Professor İhsanoğlu's taken, I think, a prescient and broad view of science that captures subjects that we certainly classify as scientific today: astronomy, physics, mathematics, medicine, chemistry, and also includes sort of intermediate genres like astrology and military science and music, which were important parts of the knowledge regimes of the Ottoman Empire and were certainly considered scientific, even if they don't fit our current definitions. I want to spend a fair bit of time, well, not a couple minutes, reflecting that one of the great services that this translation makes possible is its use in Anglophone classrooms. And I want to dedicate these next few minutes to gesturing briefly, but quite specifically, towards some of the ways that I intend to use this work in my teaching at Harvard going forward. So I teach the big Intro to the History of Science class, HS 100, Knowing the World. It's a big undertaking every fall. And I start the class with a set of discussions about periodization and about translation movements. There's a way that this has been done quite badly in the past, especially by Europeanists, a now rejected narrative that essentially positions Arabic science as a passive vessel for Greek science that gets then passed back to the Europeans. Scientific revolution ensues. Building on Professor İhsanoğlu's work over several decades, I have for years instructed my students against this narrative. I encourage them to consider how scientific works change as they move between contexts and how many languages, Arabic, but also Persian, Hebrew, Syriac, and of course Ottoman Turkish, were languages of science. Going forward from here, I will be able to use these volumes to ask students to think about the rise of Ottoman Turkish as a scientific language. And this is, of course, a story that specialists and non-specialist Europeanists, early modernists alike know. But with the translation of the Ottoman Scientific Heritage, students can now really immerse themselves in the variety of scientific texts that were produced. They can then follow the leads in the synthetic account into the biographies and descriptions of these works. We can, and I will, ask my students then to map where these texts came from. What languages were they translated from and to? And how can they account for where these manuscripts are held today? These are all questions that any college student in the US will now be able to answer. From there, we can, and again, I will, transition into understanding the importance of prosopography, of biographies, as a historical genre. These are not only an important research tool for us as scholars, but in the context of Ottoman history, as everyone here knows better than I, represents an essential emek genre. This will allow me to introduce Tashkoprazade's biographical encyclopedias, which provide an early modern example of the importance of genre as a cultural product. Additionally, our students are clamoring for teaching on the history of the environment. And as I was reading these volumes, I was absolutely struck by the incredible importance of geography and cartography to the sources, among the sources that you've represented. Geography is at the forefront of many of these conversations. I was thrilled to learn about Haji Ahmad al-Tunisi's 16th century heart-shaped planisphere map, which I will certainly visit this summer when I'm at the Biblioteca Marciana for research. I disappeared down a beautiful rabbit hole investigating the Piri Reis maps, aided by the extensive bibliography assembled by Professor İhsanoğlu in these volumes. Throughout, I think one of the themes that emerges so clearly from reading these prosopographies, and by reading these prosopographies, I really mean you just flipping from one page to the next. These volumes are so incredibly rich. One of the things that emerges is that we can more fully appreciate the extent of the networks of Ottoman learning. We might think of Saidi Ali Rais, another navigator whose travels took him across the Indian Ocean and then back with many stops in between. The travel itself is not surprising. I give a whole lecture on pre-modern travel. But the level of documentation of it through works describing his adventures, from which I found the source text in English and continued reading and reading, his geographical and astronomical treatises, and then also the accompanying text on scientific instruments like the astrolabe and the celestial globe. These all enabled the voyages and have also contributed to the reporting of them. While Saidi Ali Rais's travels are famous, other times the prosopographies rely merely on the names themselves to understand that the learned men circulating in the Ottoman Empire hailed from the Maghreb to Bosnia to Uzbekistan and beyond. As I always remind my students, the early modern world, not entirely unlike our own world today, was marked both by the peculiarities of local customs and a staggering degree of cosmopolitanism. I think there's perhaps no greater proof of this than the Ottoman scientific heritage documented in these volumes. We far too seldom have the opportunity to celebrate works of scholarship that open just so many paths forward for future research. I'm optimistic about having this resource available in English. I'm excited about the research that will surely begin here, including my own. A project like this facilitates collaboration. It promotes both teaching and research. It is an exceptional gift to the field, and I expect that it will have an invigorating impact on future research and teaching for many decades to come. I thank you both for your work.
Before closing, I just wanted to highlight two things that were not really highlighted about Professor İhsanoğlu's many wonderful qualities and contributions. One of them has to do with teamwork. Volumes 2 and 3 of the new 3-volume English publication, the Turkish publication is in 2 volumes, list the names of some of the major teammates and assistants that Professor İhsanoğlu worked with, Ramazan Şeşen being one of the most prominent scholarly names among them. And it is simply a fabulous thing that teamwork takes shape in 1985. I did not know or remember it was that early. And then over the course of many decades produces such outstanding results for us all to benefit. And the teamwork itself needs an intellectual vision, of course, a organizational labor to oversee the teamwork. And in all of that, I believe also the comments of my colleagues, Professor Meyer and Findley, indicated, Professor İhsanoğlu acted with great vision and with great organizational administrative skill beyond all his scholarly achievements since the 1979 was it when he started working at Ersika and turning it into a flourishing cultural institution. The other thing that I want to mention is part of my blurb, the blurb that Professor İhsanoğlu kindly asked me to write for the Turkish volume, and then the English translation came out, where I say basically we now know that the entrenched view that the Ottoman Scientific Heritage produced nothing noteworthy was a misconception stemming from prejudice and ignorance. No scholar has played a more significant role in raising this awareness than Ekmeleddin İhsanoğlu. And then I conclude by saying, oh, that's the wrong page. In this work, you will find the products of an academic and intellectual journey that has transformed not only the history of science, but also the broader framework of the history of Islamic civilization, as well as the framework of the study of Ottoman history. Moreover, thanks to his linguistic skill and mastery of technical knowledge, you will savor an authorial elegance. I think this word has not been used yet, and this is what I wanted to leave you with. An authorial and, of course, a personal elegance that makes even seemingly complex issues accessible to every curious reader. It is that quality of intellectual elegance that, and much more than that we also associate with Professor İhsanoğlu. And I would like to thank him for being a model in that regard. Thank you.